Concerns are rising over a trend that seems to be emerging in higher education amid the pandemic. It's being reported that colleges and universities nationwide are engaged in a game of bait and switch, where institutions are charging full price for an education that at first was billed as in person, but now it's going to be online. Joining us to discuss, Eduardo Neret, the digital reporter at Campus Reform. Hey, Eduardo, it's good to see you again. Last time we spoke, we weren't exactly sure where the universities would be come fall. Have we heard of more universities and colleges deciding to commit to that full-on online learning in the fall?
We have. Emma, you hit the nail on the head. This is a bait and switch because a lot of college students around the country, when they were deciding whether they were going to enroll in classes in the fall, they were under the impression from a number of their institutions that they were either going to reopen or reopen partially. When you couple that with the fact that a lot of high school students across the country, they just passed their enrollment deadline and they were trying to look at which schools were going to be reopened. These deadlines have passed. These schools and students have enrolled in classes, and now the universities are saying, actually, we think we're going to be online in the fall. We don't think we're going to be able to be in person. So when you consider how much money is paid for a college education, it's quite unfair to a lot of these students. Now, that's not to say every campus everywhere across the country should reopen. I think depending on the location and depending on the student body and the community that these schools lie in, those factors have to be considered. But we're not really seeing that from schools like Harvard. At other schools at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we've shown schools like American University, Syracuse, Johns Hopkins. They're all raising tuition in a time that we know the education is going to be diminished because it's happening from a computer.
Yeah, and you say raising the tuition here. Just want to make that clear. The other universities that we've seen, they're going to maintain that same tuition cost, even though it's just online learning, as opposed to the in-person learning, which is what students would normally prepare to be paying for. How do you think that's going to impact the actual education of those students attending these online classes?
Well, it's going to be a lot poorer, and students have already said that. So a College Pulse poll found that 70% of students say that online learning, they highly dislike it. It's harder to learn. They feel like they get less information outside of the classroom. You know, 1/3 of high school seniors said they wouldn't go to an institution that had all online learning. And I think people should remember that there's a lot of funding that goes into a college and university that doesn't necessarily have to do with the education. So, for example, Berkeley has said tuition is going to remain in excess of $40,000 this upcoming year. But at the same time, they've said, you know, you're going to have limited access to the library. You're going to have limited access to learning centers and athletic facilities. So that is typically what a college tuition goes to. It goes to those other services on campus. But when you can't get that right now, it certainly begs the question, then why should I pay the full price? You know, if you look at these online degrees across the country, you look at the University of Phoenix. If the University of Phoenix was charging $40,000, $50,000 for a degree, nobody would attend. I mean, that is the point of an online education. It's supposed to be cheaper. It's supposed to be more efficient. But that's not what's happening at most schools across the country right now.
And we've seen this move to go online as well play out in a lawsuit because 60 public and private universities, they're backing a lawsuit seeking to block a new ICE rule on student visas. The new policy saying that international students would have to leave the U.S. if their schools moved classes exclusively online due to the coronavirus, which we've seen. What do you make of this lawsuit, this pushback from universities?
So ICE is saying that if the students just take some of their classes in person, they could be allowed to stay or they could transfer to another institution. So a lot of these colleges and universities know that. They know that if they provided their international students the ability to take at least one class online, that they could stay, but they're choosing not to reopen. Instead, they're choosing to sue. And people can have a debate about the ICE issue. People can certainly disagree. But the point that ICE is getting that at is it would be absurd and ridiculous to set the precedent of handing out a student visa for someone to come to the country and take a class online. It's certainly not a precedent they want to be setting. And instead of focusing on this lawsuit, these colleges and universities should focus on reopening. Schools are doing it across the country. Schools like Notre Dame, Purdue, Cornell and Ivy League. They've even said, this is how we're going to open. We believe opening is actually safer than staying closed. And so the schools, instead of suing, should be focusing on that right now.
All right. Out of time. Eduardo Neret, thank you for coming on and sharing those thoughts.
Thanks for having me.
You got it.